Housing has become a problem for all ethnic groups. In fact, Massachusetts has become one of the most expensive places to not only buy a home, but to afford the cost of living. Reginald Nunnally is president of the NAACP chapter in the Blue Hills. With over 27 years' experience in economic development, as well as having served in various public service roles, what does Reg think of the current housing market? What resources are available for those looking to buy their first home? And how does cost affect one's ability to choose where they wish to live? Hello, and welcome to another edition of Close-Ups. I'm your host, Joe Collymore, and my guest today is Reginald Nunnally, the new president of the Blue Hills NAACP. But before I introduce Reg, let me give you a quick recap of who he is and what he brings to our interview. He's got over 27 years experience in business development. He has served in former Governor Deval Patrick's administration as executive director for the Supplier Diversity Office for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. He also served on Mayor Menino's cabinet as executive director for Boston's Enhanced Enterprise Community for the city. He has worked with the Black Ministerial Alliance. He has received numerous accolades for his work in small business advocacy and small and minority business assistance. He resides on several boards, including the BRA's Boston's Local Development Corporation Loan Program, as well as the New England Area Conference of the NAACP. And he also serves on the Gaming Commission's Vendor Advisory Board. He's married with 2 children and a granddaughter. Welcome, Reg.
Thank you, Joe.
Let's talk about affordable housing. But before we do, could you just sort of give our listeners sort of an overview of the NAACP and more specifically this new chapter in the Blue Hills?
Oh, would love to. And thank you for asking. The Blue Hills NAACP branch, which is, again, 5 towns just south of Boston.
And those towns are?
Milton, Canton, Randolph, Stoughton, and Sharon. And they comprise approximately 150,000 people, with probably around 30,000 or 20% people of color. And it all got started, in 2015. I retired from government, and I was approached by Juan Cofield, and he's the president of the New England Conference. And he asked me if I would help create another branch because he had been getting inquiries, particularly from businesses, about what was the NAACP doing, or what was it that the NAACP could do to help them move forward in their businesses. He reached out to me, and we began to start the process of recruiting the requirements for establishing a branch, which was you had to have 100 paid members initially, and then you had to appeal to the national organization, of which we did. So in 2016, we did the recruitment. In February, we had it planned to coincide with the Black History Month. We made our official application. In April, we were unanimously approved by the National NAACP Board of Directors. Subsequent to that, we actually held a general membership in which we elected an executive board. And I was fortunate enough to be elected president of that board in May of 2018. We're at this point now where we're trying to put together a strategic plan and raise some funds to actually become operational. And we're looking at really 2019 to really begin to advocate and implement some of the programs that we're looking to implement. And one of the things that we're really focusing on as a branch is really economic development and housing.
And housing. Before we talk about housing, because I'd like to go into a discussion about affordable housing. But before we do that, just to dispel a couple of myths about the NAACP. Is it an organization that's exclusive in its membership just to people of color? Can people of European descent, white folk, join this organization?
Anyone can join this organization. As a matter of fact, we have a number of white folks that actually are members. As a matter of fact, the town manager of Randolph, who's white, is a member of the organization. And throughout the entire system has 2,200 branches with over 300,000 members. And there are a number of presidents that are actually white and oversee a branch. There are some branches that are completely white. So no, let's dispel that myth right away. Anyone can join. We welcome everybody, and I particularly looking to grow the Blue Hills branch to include as many people as possible.
Turning to housing, any modern day report will show that in Massachusetts is one of the most expensive places to live in the country. In the top 5, I understand. And especially near our metropolitan areas like Boston, for example. Some might accredit that to such accoutrements as state-of-the-art medical facilities. Some of the world's most renowned educational institutions, as you know, are right here. Plus our historic landmarks are all within walking distance of the inner city. But what makes affordable housing especially difficult for minorities in our day and age in Massachusetts? What do you say to that?
Well, when we're talking about affordable housing for minorities, I like to really talk about just affordable housing in general, because affordable housing is just not for people of color. There is 2 Bostons emerging now, one for the very high income and those that are in the moderate to low income. And right now, the focus, when you say affordable housing, folks immediately think about blacks and Hispanics, when in effect, it impacts white people as well. But right now, Boston is a majority minority city. It's about 55%. It's, as you said, it's a walking city. So you can get around Boston pretty good. The transportation, public transportation is pretty good. Traffic is a bear.
Oh, yeah.
So the closer that you live to downtown Boston, the more expensive it's going to be. The south end of Boston at one point was where folks did not want to be. High crime, the amenities were very difficult to reach, no jobs, and it was basically a place for the homeless were put, or the very poor were put. As Boston began to really redefine itself, South End properties became desirable. The housing expenses went up, and poor people of all colors were displaced and moved further into Roxbury. As those areas began to become saturated, and there was no more housing, then it became the next step. So most people in Boston will understand that the Highland Park area, Fort Hill, is now one of those areas that are very expensive. And it's becoming more and more difficult for the city and the state to be able to produce enough what I call affordable housing. What is interesting is that in America, housing is one of the ways that people create some wealth. In this case, affordable housing, it is a way to limit the amount of wealth that you can actually have. So when I'm looking at
that?
Well, if you get the opportunity to purchase affordable housing unit through the city of Boston, or one of the other nonprofit organizations that are actually doing this, there are a number of covenants that are put on the property. So in some cases, you can't sell the property to who you'd like. You can't sell it for the price that you would like to sell it for, because there are limits that are put on it. So many people that buy these properties, they're very excited. and happy to have a home of their own that they can call their own, right? But when they get into reading the fine print, 5, 6, 10 years, and in some cases 99 years, they have to ask for permission to refinance, to send their kids off to school, to refinance, to open up a business. You have to ask for permission to do that, and you have to get the okay from whatever that entity was. So when we're really talking about affordable housing and what does that really mean, and who's really accessing it, it is really those types of questions that have to be redefined, because when this was first enacted, downtown Boston wasn't as popular as it is today. Now it's not unheard of for the $1 million price tag to go on a 1 or a 2 bedroom condo in the downtown area. And as those prices rise there, the prices rise throughout the city. Okay. So places that normally were kind of set aside for low income people, right? All of a sudden, they're being highly sought after. It is very difficult to be able to produce enough affordable housing for the people that actually need it in the city.
I've seen some numbers of the various neighborhoods, if you will, the sections of Boston, Jamaica Plain, the South End, East Boston, the North End, South Boston, where the average price of a 1-bedroom rental is close to $2,000 a month.
Oh, easily.
That's the average.
Oh, that's easily.
A 1-bedroom.
A 1-bedroom. 2 bedrooms are going for much higher than that. And the closer you get to the center of the city, the higher the rent. Places like Brighton, where there's a huge student population, they're getting charged enormous amounts of rents because their parents are willing to pay to have their children that are going to school housed. And they're able to afford these prices because they usually have 2, 3 roommates. And in some cases, it's either equal or less to rent an apartment.
Would you go so far as to say that there is discrimination still existing in home realty or even the pricing of properties in our metro Boston area?
Well, discrimination, is relative. Before there was redlining.
Oh yes.
And there was neighborhoods that had packs that they wouldn't sell to people of color. I see what we see really now is that the prices that are being offered are keeping people out of the housing market. So where you could possibly afford a $300,000 single family building in any of these neighborhoods, you start to find out that these buildings are now going for $450,000, $500,000. And under the routine banking rules, you generally have to come up with 20%. Not a lot of people sort of have 20% of $500,000 sitting in the bank ready to buy a home. So there has to be a number of resources that are out there that help people actually get into the housing market. And there are a number of resources that are out there.
And what role does the NAACP, could they actually play in helping to promote awareness of what those resources are?
Well, right now, the Blue Hills branch has a partnership with Wells Fargo. And most recently, they had what's called a LIFT neighborhood program that provided individual subsidies to potential home buyers to the tune of $20,000. So Wells Fargo would actually provide a $20,000 grant to an individual that wanted to buy a house in the Suffolk and Norfolk counties. So that is clearly a help. And then with some of the other types of programs, you'd have to mirror those to not a 20% down, but a 3% down or a 5% down, with assistance from the Commonwealth with closing costs. So there are a number of different types of programs that folks that might be eligible, and it's usually for moderate to low income folks that need to be able to go through the classes, because you have to go through the classes, first time home buyer program. You have to get your certificate to present to the banks that participate in those 3% or 5% down. The Mass Housing Finance Agency also will provide you with some additional down payment assistance as well as closing costs. And of course, the City of Boston, if you're looking in that dear city, can also provide some services as well.
Now, are some of these resources that you've ticked off, are they in place as a result of the housing crisis of 2007, 2008 and the predatory lending that was taking place back then?
Well, I think those programs actually existed during that time. Okay. I think that you see them a little more sophisticated today in terms of ensuring that people really do understand the consequences of making bad decisions. And folks are putting resources into trying to educate folks as to what those decisions might be up and down the line. So they really do go over, it's a 2-day class of which you have to take a test to get through. And if you get through, you get this certificate, and I believe it's good for 2 years. But it goes through the soup through nuts in terms of what it takes to actually purchase a home, how to keep the home, and when you experience some difficulties, who you need to talk to as soon as possible and not at the last minute.
Not at the last minute, sure, sure.
Now, with all of that, it's still difficult to actually find housing that can be affordable because the prices are so high in the area.
When you talk about affordable housing, and there's a program called 40B, which is very controversial in its structure, particularly as it hits our suburban communities. And now I'm not presenting you as an expert on 40B, but you're certainly aware of what's going on, and I'd love to just get your perspective on what it's all about, and perhaps how do we help dispel some of the myths associated with the 40B as it applies to not in my neighborhood. And you know what I'm talking about when I say not in my neighborhood.
Yeah. 40B was an attempt to develop additional affordable housing in whatever towns development was going to occur. So in the smaller towns, it's more difficult than in the larger towns because from what I understand, 10 or more units that are being developed, 10% of those units, must be affordable, which means that the price tag on those affordable units are going to be less than the market rate units. Many people look at that as saying, well, I've got to pay X amount, and the person living right next door to me is only going to pay something less. Not only are they going to pay less for the unit itself, but they're going to pay less taxes as well, because the unit is only worth a certain amount of money. The other, which is, I think, a myth, is trying to attract people, to the low-income people, to purchase those buildings. So if you're in a $700,000, $800,000, $1 million building, you may have a concept that says, I don't want people of color, or I don't want low-income people living next door to me. Right. And I think it is myth. I don't think people need to be as fearful as that, because the educational types of programs are really weeding out the folks that really don't understand about ownership. Ownership is much different from renting, because a renter is always dependent on the owner to come and fix and make sure everything is taken care of. In affordable housing under the 40B, the same rules apply. You must take care of your unit. You must pay whatever the HOA fee is, and you must abide by all of the condo rules that are there. So I think that anyone that is contemplating either buying into a building that has 40B units or affordable housing units, they need not be fearful.
I'd really want to dive a little deeper into the potential role that an organization like the NAACP could play as an advocate on behalf of affordable home ownership. What role do you see that being, and how might it apply here, more specifically in the South Shore?
Well, people get in trouble at various points, in their life, and one of the things that the NAACP can do in terms of being an advocate is try to get people that get into trouble to get them to the right resource. NAACP generally does not run programs, but they become familiar with the various programs to direct people so that they can get the right assistance in enough time to hopefully sway the problem more in their favor, as opposed to waiting until the last minute when it's very little anyone can do. So the educational types of programs that we really do advocate for, and this would be for anybody, and that is, going through those courses, to understand what the breadth is in terms of purchasing a home. The city of Boston has a program that says once you purchase the home, you need to go through another set of programs to understand what it takes to take care of the home. There are organizations there that when you start missing your payment because you got laid off from your job, you lost your job or something, is that they're there to help you with your lending institution to say, hey, can you begin to put things on hold and explain those situations out? As opposed to how we've all been brought up is to you handle your own problem. Well, some of these problems you can't handle by yourself and you need help. And I think that the NAACPs around the country and here in Massachusetts can be very instrumental in understanding where those resources are and how to get people connected.
That makes a lot of good sense. And when we talk about helping those citizens, it really comes down to consumer education, if you think about it. And so could you share some thoughts and ideas that you might have on helping with consumer education?
Well, Joe, because many of us, particularly in our age bracket, we've either purchased our homes, we're probably not looking to buy another one.
Right.
I think with the limited resources that all of us really have, we're really looking at the millennials. How do we educate the millennials? Because they're at a point now where they're probably going to make less money than their parents. And they still need a place to actually live. And they want to be in places that are hot, exciting, and that means they want to be in places that they can either get to real quick or they're in the heart of it. But I think that what we've got to be able to do is we've got to get to the millennials early and be able to explain to them, educate them as to what is really out there. Because first homes are not your McMansions. Your first home is probably either a 2-bedroom condo or a 3-bedroom single family, or a 2-family to help bring in some income, and then you move forward to getting something that you really would dream to have. So being able to educate these millennials as to what are the steps, because millennials are pretty much impatient. They want it now, they gotta have it, and if they can't have it, they're gonna move on to something else. And I think that we've got to be in a position to say, hey, look, you got to come up with a strategic plan.
Do you see the NAACP working in collaboration with other institutions and associations in advocating for affordable housing and in advocating for adequate housing for our both millennial and aging senior population? Or do you see the NAACP working somewhat unto itself in those areas?
Well, I'll tell you, in the past, Joe, the NAACP, generally worked by itself.
Right.
At the convention this year in San Antonio, they're creating a partnership with the Urban League, and it's around economic development and workforce development. But I use that as the way of the future, is that we've got to partner with other entities that may specialize in some things, rely on the NAACP advocacy and support because they have that brand, right? And bring in as many people underneath the tent as possible, to be able to provide the services and resources that are sorely needed for all of us that are sort of aging in place, and those that are coming along that need various types of resources.
One area of particular concern here on the South Shore is our rising cost of flood insurance, for example. Do you see perhaps where the NAACP can help join in league with other organizations that can advocate for affordable insurance, homeowners?
Yes, I do believe, and particularly on the South Shore, it's very difficult because we're getting these storms and people's property are getting damaged. The price of flood insurance is just going crazy. One of the things that I think that the NAACP needs to do is advocate to the government, in terms of trying to create a program that competes with the private insurance programs to help lower the cost. That there needs to be sort of a conglomeration of entities that really are coming together and saying, hey, look, we want to pay the right price. We just don't want to get overpriced, which adds to the cost of owning a home. And there are a number of other fees that are associated with that. So you're talking about flood insurance, and today you're paying X, and next year you're paying 2X. And that's why it's so important that everybody goes through some type of a program that makes them aware. Because when you're buying a home and you're real close, you're so excited, you're ready to sign. I don't know very many people that will go to a closing and read all the documents. They're just signing away, and that's why it's important to have an attorney with you to be able to say, that one's okay, but we need to talk about this.
Well, I think that the NAACP can play a real key role in serving, let's say, as a conduit for the potential homeowner, the existing homeowner, to be able to navigate and find the right resources to set them on that path for success.
We'll be getting in contact with all the banks in the 5 towns, and we'll be asking for them to join and to contribute so that we can pretty much have a win-win situation. And what I mean by that is don't contribute to the NAACP just because you need to feel good about yourself. Contribute because we're going to help you do business.
And when you talk about contribution, we're talking more than just throwing some dollars in a pot.
Yeah.
They can bring technical assistance, they can bring subject matter expertise, they can volunteer staff to run Saturday workshops.
That's
and
right.
the like.
And that's exactly what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. We know through the Community Reinvestment Act that generally speaking, they provide dollars. The Blue Hills branch wants to be a little bit different. We want to be in a place where, there's a bank that will say, hey, we'll develop your website for you. We'll contribute somebody to provide technical assistance on Saturdays for 2 hours a day. So we want to partner with the banks. And that was one of the things that when we made our application, we made it very well known that, the Blue Hills area wants to focus on economic development because we really do believe that it is the millennials that they need that education, and we want to advocate for them.
That's a great point. Well, Reg, I want to thank you very much for sitting with me today on our episode of Close-Ups. And I want to thank our viewers for joining us. Until next time, this is Joe Collymore signing off.